future. Yeah, boys.
Human error.
Human error.
Yeah, I mean that's something that can kill you.
Oh god.
The worst part is, it's like almost okay, isn't it?
Is the future.
Like, if you were stuck playing Chroma, you'd be like, I guess, but I could have been stepping off, right?
I could have been Sevagoth or Cyanox.
Or Hydroid.
Notice how I'm like orange and red critting and I just randomly hit yellows.
Yeah. I mean, this is the future. You should have 40 mil.
Yeah. I told you I hit a 69 mil. I wasn't
I mean,
lying. I just hit a
I knew that.
47. I just hit an 88 mil. See, like I wasn't kidding.
I know you weren't. Alright, alright. Buff up, buff up, buff up. Here we go. This is the
It's like I threw a Pokeball at her.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Chroma, and first things first, let's go over the build. So with Chroma, I have one build, though there are a few different ways to play him. I was using Nourish over his first ability Spectral Scream, as his first ability Spectral Scream is entirely useless and there is no world where you should ever be using this ability. As for the stat distribution, I was running Medium Duration. As Chroma, you're just playing Buff Simulator, going over the first three abilities that all only have a 25-second base duration. This can get very tiresome very quickly, which is why I chose to slot some duration, although you really don't need it. Negative efficiency is completely fine, especially with Nourish, giving you 4x more energy on pickup. I was running base range as I was playing solo, though if you're playing in a group, you really want to be playing with more range, as Chroma is a very selfish Warframe, so you want to do anything in your power to have a bit of team utility. Running extra range makes it so you apply your Vex armor to the rest of your team more consistently. I would just drop Augur Secrets and or Augur Message, or Augur Reach and Augur Stretch. Obviously, Chroma also wants super high strength, so I was running 300% strength with growing power and Moderite, pushing it up to 365. As for the Arcanes, I was running Arcane Blessing for 1200 more max health, and Arcane Avenger for 45% flat crit. You can run Molt Augmented for 60% more ability strength if you want to, at your own discretion. As for other subsume choices, you could run Ensnare if you run higher range, like 175, as also a health tank build, or you can run a Shield Gate build with Breach Surge or Pillage, as both of those abilities are very, very strong with high strength. I was choosing to use Cold Elemental Ward to have some synergy with the rest of his kit. If you do not choose to do this, you want to use Heat, as Heat is more effective hit points than Cold is. But I was using Cold for some synergy, as his third ability, Vex Armor, gives you about a 1000% Serration buff on your primary, secondary, and melee, meaning that other Serration buffs like the Arcanes have diminishing returns and aren't that useful. Using Cold Elemental Ward allows you to AoE proc Cold, which allows the use of primary Frostbite on your primary, which gives crit damage and multi-shot instead of a Serration buff, which is infinitely times more useful. If you don't choose to go Cold Elemental Ward, I would suggest Primary Deadhead instead for the 30% headshot multiplier. There are some downsides to the Cold Elemental Ward in the fact that it is pretty inconsistent, especially in a group, so honestly just use whichever one you want. I preferred Cold just for some unique synergy. As for the primary weapons, use honestly whatever you want. Pretty much anything works on Chroma because you're doing so much damage. I was using the Kuva Comb and it was surprisingly very effective due to its high fire rate and innate punch through. This thing was very fun to use. Especially with Arcane Avenger, pushing it to over 100% crit chance, which is very nice for Hunter munitions. Of course, Nourish allows you to run Corrosive on your primary and secondary, and still have Viral, and having innate Corrosive and Viral is very strong. This Riven is just a fire rate supplement. As to the secondary, because I was using Avenger, of course I was using a Nucor, because the new core has an insanely high crit multiplier. Again, running base corrosive as you already have viral from Nourish. As to the melee, I was using the Glaive Prime for an AoE nuke and to one-shot the Acolytes, but that's not all. The Glaive Prime was also my source of healing. See, again, Vex Armor gives you a Serration buff, meaning that you can freely take off Prime Pressure Point from the Glaive. This allows you to slot Life Strike, meaning that every time that you throw the Glaive, you're healing for multiple millions of health. This Riven is a Gladiator Might supplement mod. As to the Focus School, I was using Madurai for the 40% ability strength and the Phoenix Talons passive. Other Focus Schools that work well on Chroma are Vazarin for the iframes, on Protective Sling, and for any healing through, I think also Protective Sling, yep. Or Unaru if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, that way you get Poise for free, Stone Skin for 200 armor, and Caustic Strike for an 8 armor strip, which is very useful. Last but not least, there is the Companion, which is just a standard Panzer with the synth mods equipped. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Chroma in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly is KPM, secondly is Survivability, thirdly is Viability, and finally how fun is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path mod run with no Spectres, on call, and of course, no Archon shards. Now let's begin with the first topic, his KPM. So this should be fairly short. Chroma, with his third ability, Vex Armor, of course, gives around 1000% Serration bonus to all 3 of his main weapons. This means that he deals exceptional damage, especially with weapons that otherwise can't make use of high Serration buffs, such as Galvanized Savvy. Examples being something like the Bubonico, or just any other AoE weapon in general, like the Brahma, Tsar, Tetra, Tonkor, etc., etc. With Cold Elemental Ward, this also allows you to drop your Arcane, like I previously mentioned, for primary Frostbite, for further multi-shot and crit damage, which both scale exceptionally well with almost every weapon. A weapon in particular that works very well with Chroma is the Bubonico, as the Bubonico, of course, can't make use of Galvanized Savvy due to being an AoE weapon, and also has very high crit damage attached to its alt fire, and with Chroma also using Arcane Avenger, giving it a 45% crit chance to buff its atrociously low base crit chance, similar to the Nucor. The problem with Chroma's KPM, despite dealing very high damage, is that he doesn't have any form of utility in his kit to further increase his KPM, such as a grouping tool or something like Breach Surge, which takes your damage and redirects it into an AoE form. This means that the highest KPM that you can ever get on Chroma is just as high as you can get running around shooting enemies. This means that he is hard capped, and not only that, he doesn't have access to an armor strip, meaning that unless you're running a weapon that is using Slash, and even then, he doesn't have that high of scaling. Because of these reasons, I will give Chroma a flat A for his KPM. The only reason it's not lower is just because he deals so much damage, he at least has some sort of scaling. Now moving on to the second topic is survivability, and his survivability is actually very good for a Warframe that doesn't have any form of damage reduction in his kit. Chroma's third ability, Vex Armor, giving him over 1000% armor, and also Elemental Ward, either giving you health or even more armor, depending on if you go heat or cold, gives him an absurdly high armor value. I think whenever I was looking at it with cold plus just Vex Armor on the build I am using, I have about 6500 armor, which is just absurd. That is more than you have on a Styanax running Parasitic Armor with almost every single shield mod in the game. I think Styanax gets like 4 to 5k armor. So Chroma just out of the gate gets a lot of armor. This means that he's probably one of the tankiest Warframes in the game without shield gating or having a form of percentage damage reduction. That being said, because he doesn't have a form of percentage damage reduction, this means that eventually he will just outright die a lot earlier than Warframes that do have percentage damage reduction, like Citrine, Neza, or I guess Equinox, for an example. Uh, so that means that although he is innately tanky, he will just eventually die. For these reasons, I will give him an A minus for his survivability. Now moving on to the third topic, his viability, and this is where Chroma suffers a lot. So the problem with Chroma's viability is he really doesn't do anything. As I mentioned earlier, he's a very selfish Warframe, and even if you run range mods to increase the range of your Vex armor, he still isn't really doing much for the team at all, and he's not accomplishing anything either because he's not grouping the enemies. He's, again, like I mentioned during his KPM, he's hard capped to being as strong as his weapons allow. And if you take Chroma to like a just standard non-endless mission, be it Star Chart or Steel Path Star Chart, he's not really useful as you don't need the damage buff that he offers. So he's kind of completely useless in those missions. And if you plan on doing an extended mission, again, he's not very useful there either because you're not running a shield gate build on him, so you'll just eventually die and fall off. And even if you do run a shield gate build on him, he doesn't really have any helmet ability that allows him to shield gate that synergizes well with his kit. So Breach Surge, of course, is always an option, but the problem with Breach Surge on Chroma is Breach Surge isn't that great whenever you don't have a form of either lingering AoE or widespread AoE or a grouping tool. He has none of those three, and if you go something like Pillage to Armor Strip to also help you scale better, the problem with Pillage when it's your only ability to shield gate with, there is a delay between you cast it and it retracts, meaning that you can get caught out and die, which affects his survivability. So he's not that great of a Warframe to go in extended missions in, and he's completely useless in not endurance runs. So there's not really a place for Chroma, and the only place that he is good at is Profit Taker. But then there's another problem. The only reason that Chroma's good at Profit Taker is because his 4 doubles the credits. You don't use Chroma for Profit Taker because Chroma is actually good at killing the boss. You solely take him to double the credits and that's it. If you were to just pick one Warframe to kill Profit Taker as fast as possible and credits were out the window, you would probably pick Volt. So him being good at Profit Taker because he happens to double credits is kind of like it's like not really impressive. So in the end, I think I'm going to have to give him, I think, a fairly generous D plus reliability. Now, moving on to the final topic, his fun rank, and I genuinely think that he falls off here as well. See, he's not really interesting to play. The only thing that he has going for him is the fact that he has so much high base damage that he opens up your arsenal to being able to use pretty much any weapon you want. And of course that's always a plus. But the problem is his playstyle is just so boring of you just sitting there, shooting enemies, not really doing anything. You just cycle through your 3 buffs that you press once every 45 seconds. And then outside of that, you're just sitting there looking around, pressing left mouse button. It reminds me of a lot of Revenant, and honestly, it's just so insanely boring, I cannot get over it. In fact, Chroma is one of the few frames where I absolutely had to be in a Discord call the entire time I was doing missions as Chroma for testing or even doing the final run. I just had to be in a Discord call because I was just so bored that if I wasn't in a Discord call, I probably would have had to pause and done it over the course of a few hours instead of just like sitting down and doing a 1 hour run in an hour. He just doesn't really have that many. Like, he just doesn't have much gameplay variance, and his playstyle is just boring to me. I'm sure there's like some people that like don't like pressing abilities for whatever reason, and they really like this sort of gameplay. Like, but for me, I personally think he's extremely boring, and I will give him a D- rank for his fun. In conclusion, Chroma is a C+ tier Warframe who isn't terrible, but there are a lot of frames who do things that he does, but just significantly better. One of the closest examples I can think of is Banshee's sonar ability. So Chroma's Vex armor and Banshee's sonar ability both make Banshee and herself and Chroma and himself deal exceptionally high damage. The problem is, whenever you compare them 1-to-1, sonar is just significantly better. Not only does it work at a further range, but it also self-refreshes itself and works with abilities, whereas Vex armor only works off of your weapons. This is just one example, but there are other examples of Chroma falling short when you compare him to other Warframes. That being said, just because he's C+ doesn't mean he's terrible, he just isn't amazing.
I think at most, like, I could see someone, like, if you actually find him fun, right? I could see someone rating him, like, a B at highest. Like, at the absolute highest. You're like, oh, like, you know, he's, like, fun for just, like, shooting guns. I find it
Yeah,
fun.
but you say that, but there's people that unironically think that Sevagoth is, like, an S tier frame.
Yeah, but those people don't actually have an opinion, right? Like, there's a difference between having an opinion and not having an opinion, right? Like, I feel like you can have the opinion that Chroma's, like, in your Goss video, you mentioned, like, someone could easily rate him, like, an S tier Warframe, right? Like, that's an actual opinion, right? Like, someone could actually rate Goss like an S tier, right? Like, over their right is kind of, you know, debatable, but it's like, you know, but, like, I feel like if you rate Sevagoth an S tier, you can say it. That's actually insane.
I mean, S
Like,
stands for Sevagoth.
yeah, S also stands for shit, so I guess maybe he's an S tier.